Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Now, many of you will be aware that I have covered some of the work of historians Wilson and Blackett, and I've also covered in some detail the plight of Wilson and Blackett and the blatant attempts to bury their research, and even once or twice attempts to bury them. The person who first told me about Wilson and Blackett back in 2009 is a man who I have been meaning to interview for some years now. He is a best-selling author, researcher and expert on all things esoteric. Adrian Gilbert. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you. Lovely to see you, Richard.
Now, we're going to talk about the work that you did with Wilson and Blackett, in particular King Arthur. Mm-hmm. And you co-wrote The Holy Kingdom with Wilson and Blackett, which was published in 97, I think?
98 it was, actually.
98. And then I'm going to ask you about some of your more recent research into the Arthur dynasty after the legendary King Arthur. But I'd just like to start about asking you about Wilson and Blackett themselves. Mm-hmm. And how did you come to be aware of Wilson and Blackett's research?
Well, that's a story in itself, actually. I first read a little article, I think it was in the Sunday Telegraph or something like that, which talked about them in a rather jocular fashion, you know, tongue-in-cheek. And then a little while later, perhaps a couple of months later, I met a clairvoyant, a lady who had been doing some work on the pyramids, which is kind of an area I was very into. And she gave me a reading. Now, I don't normally go to clairvoyants for readings, but she gave me a reading anyway, and she told me very specifically, she said, "You're going to see a cross on a wall, and behind it there's a real one." So I thought, oh, well, that's interesting, because I was about to go to Mexico. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Maya, but there's a famous city called Palenque, and in that city there's somewhere called the Temple of the Cross, which has a cross on the front of it. So I thought, I'll have a little look behind. Maybe I'll see there's something there, that's what she's on about. So I went to Palenque and I had a look behind and there was nothing there. Mm. And I thought, well, you know, clairvoyants, what can you do with them, you know? So I thought no more about it. And a couple of weeks later, out of the blue, I got a phone call from Alan Wilson.
So this would be in the early, mid-90s?
This would be in 1994,
right.
I think about December, yeah.
Right, okay.
And I'd never met the man. I didn't know anything about him except that article I'd read. But I was curious because, you know, I'm interested in King Arthur. I think we all are. And it had pricked my interest. So we got chatting and I decided I'd go and pay him a visit. He lived in Cardiff at that time. So I went down there to Cardiff with my wife and he showed us, you know, material about his discoveries about King Arthur, which I'm sure we'll be saying more about later. But at the end of our chat, he said, "Oh, I've got something else I want to show you. I've got a little video," and he popped the video in. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You know, this is a sacred cross. It's in Nevern, and it's on a wall." And he said, "We believe that behind it there's a cave, and in the cave is the real cross of Jesus Christ." And I could have fallen off the seat, you know, because, I mean, I didn't know if there's any truth in that. I mean, maybe there isn't. Maybe there is. I don't know. Nobody's actually been in there to find out. But the fact that he raised the idea of a cross on a wall and behind it there's a real one, when a clairvoyant had said the same thing to me just, you know, a couple of months earlier, mm-hmm. It was just an incredible coincidence. So on the basis of that, I decided, well, I'll go further with these guys and I'll see about writing a book with them, which is what they wanted, mm-hmm. which became The Holy Kingdom.
And they showed you very strong evidence, you would say, of King Arthur in South Wales.
Absolutely, yes.
And gradually, or over a certain period, you became more and more convinced by that evidence.
Yes,
and that resulted in the book. Now, I've covered, I would say, predominantly their plight rather than their research.
Right.
And the fact that, I would say that there definitely has been attempts on their lives. And if you want to view the documentation of that, go back and look at some of the TV shows that I've recorded documenting all of the attacks, smear attempts, etc., etc. So I just want to ask you your opinion, Adrian. Why would somebody be attacking these two guys?
Well, I think there's several reasons for that. Depends who's doing the attacking, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to speculate too far, but I know, because I've encountered this in many different areas, there is such a thing as an academic establishment. And it occupies everything. It occupies physics, it occupies Egyptology, it occupies British archaeology. There's a kind of standard status quo, and they uphold that status quo, and they don't want anyone rocking the boat. They don't want new ideas, particularly. And it's always been like that, because if you've become Professor so-and-so, and the basis of you being professor is that you are the expert, if someone comes along and proves that what you know is actually wrong,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly you've lost your credibility. Yeah, suddenly you're just like everyone else, you know, you're having to start again. So people defend their territory bitterly,
Mm-hmm.
and the higher up they are, the more they do defend it. And I've heard it said that the only time you get real change is when people die.
Right.
And I think there's some truth in that. So that's the first level of, you know, antagonism they ran up against.
Right.
But
Academic establishment, but then there's perhaps forces higher than that, you think?
well, there's other forces as well that you have to understand that most of academia these days is sponsored. It's either sponsored by government or by some special interest group. So people get research grants, professorship chairs are paid for, and they have to make sure the money is going to keep coming in. So again, there is a personal need to defend their income because they got children at school, you know, they got mortgages to pay. They don't want to see that disappear. And the third level, I would call corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no doubt about it in my mind that in Wales particularly there's a huge amount of corruption, that you have a political establishment that's been unchanged pretty much for 100 years. You know, it's been run by the same people. And they call them the Tafia or the Tafiosi. And as you know, we laugh about that. We say, yeah, that's a nice pun, isn't it, Tafia? But there is. And these people, they control who gets the grants. They get backsheesh in their back pocket. And there's even people who are doing things which are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, you know, in archaeology. Wilson told me quite specifically that there were, I'm not going to name names, but there were particular people who were supposedly doing digs, but not doing anything and scattering a few Roman coins around, you know, to make it look like they'd found something.
Right. And what about state involvement or secret society involvement? Because, for example, when their research reached a certain level, they were featured on the 6 o'clock news in 1986 as a main item, and then all of a sudden, jump, it was gone. So that's not the Tafia preventing further programs on that. This is someone who can control what's on the BBC.
Yeah.
So do you think it's at that level?
That happened to me, actually, as well. When we were launching the Holy Kingdom, we had booked for me to come down to Cardiff for an interview with the BBC. And when I arrived, it turned out that, oh, we've got no cameras because Nelson Mandela's here. So, you know, we can't do it.
Right.
Oh, we found a camera, it's all right. We'll do an interview with you in the car park, if that's okay with you, Adrian. So
Right.
I don't think there was even a film in the camera.
Right. So if we assume that there is some group which has that kind of power, is that security services? Is it the Crown?
I think the BBC for a start. I have to be careful what I say here.
Right.
Right. But they have an agenda. There's no doubt about it. They have an agenda, and a lot of what you're being fed through the news, through educational programs, current affair programs, even things like a series like Holby City or whatever, that it's not just drama or news or comment, it's done to program you in a specific way with to their agenda. Now, who's dictating that agenda? Whether it's the high-ups in the BBC or whether it's whoever controls the BBC. I mean, they're supposedly a completely separate organisation. And I'm not really a conspiracy person anyway, but I do notice when people are trying to program me to agree with a certain viewpoint. We call it indoctrination. And I mean, Dr. Goebbels would be delighted. You know, he would say, yeah, these are my disciples.
Yeah.
But it's all, and we pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
well,
incredible.
Some of us pay for it. Now, and when the Holy Kingdom was first published, because we are going to go into some of this research in a moment, you were surprised at how quickly the print runs were being closed down. Yeah. So just tell us about that.
Well, I'll tell you about the Holy Kingdom, right. Now, I'd had 3 books, there are 2 in the top 10 before. The Orion Mystery went up to number 1 in non-fiction, which is pretty remarkable for when you're writing esoteric alternative history that goes against the grain of the establishment. To get your book that high up was remarkable. The My Own Prophecies book, I followed that up with. That I got number 5, I think. And the book I did after that, Magi, that got to about number 16. So I had 3 books which were top 20 bestsellers in this genre of non-fiction. And remember, you're up against all the cookbooks, the celebrity biographies, all of them, you know. So to get into the top 20 is remarkable. So when the Holy Kingdom came out, you can imagine the publishers were very happy with me. They wanted the book to succeed. They spent a lot of money on it. The production values and the printing, it's done very well. And the book, it got up to, I think, about number 17 or something like that. It did okay. I mean, it wasn't, sort of flying off the shelves, but it was doing well. And there was no reason to think that it would not continue to sell, and gradually the sales would build over time. Because it's such a fascinating area, and what we were saying was completely new.
And this was research based on Wilson and Blackett's, 20 previous years of Dark Age British history, the Arthurian king.
Well, I'd been through their research with a fine-tooth comb, and I'd tidied things up, and I'd checked things, and I'd been very meticulous in putting it all together and then presenting it in a form which is digestible, because, when you write a book, it's got to be entertaining and digestible as well as informative.
Yeah.
So that was really what I was there for to do, but it was basically their research. So we were all hopeful and expecting, and it was doing reasonably well. It was in all the shops, like Waterstones and the Dylans were around at that time. It was in Lears in Cardiff. It was doing very well. It was in all the shops. And that was in the hardback, and then it went into those days we had book club editions as well, so it did that as well. So I was optimistic. I thought this book's going to be all right. Well, within 9 months, they announced that they wanted to discontinue the hardback. Well, I thought, well, this is a little premature, but yeah, I can understand. Perhaps they feel that they've made their hardback sales. They don't want to, have the excess stock littering up the warehouse. The publishers are realistic that way. So, okay, well, it's going into paperback. So it went into paperback, and again, it went into the top 20. Doing all right, And that was the sort of book I would expect to carry on ticking over year by year, making sales, maybe even getting some momentum.
No. It's hardly time sensitive, is it?
It's hardly time sensitive, and it's the sort of thing that you would expect to become a standard, work on the subject. Well, again, within 9 months, they took that off the shelves. It was as though within 18 months they'd killed that book.
Right. So you think it's possible, although you don't know, that the publisher was put under pressure or maybe paid off by someone high up? You think it's possible?
It's possible that someone put some pressure. And I mean, I'm reminded of the Velikovsky affair. Do you know anything about the
No.
Velikovsky affair? Well, Immanuel Velikovsky was a very famous author of a book called Worlds in Collision. It was published in 1950 originally, and it was about how Venus, the planet Venus, had come out of Jupiter as a comet and come very close to the Earth and caused all manner of catastrophes and ending dinosaurs and so on before it eventually settled down in its orbit. Highly controversial. Some of what he had to say, I think he made some good arguments. Some I think was pretty fanciful.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, he did present a very interesting alternative view. But it really upset the establishment. I mean, when I say upset, really upset. It was published, I think, it was either Cambridge or Oxford University Press who published it originally, I think. I might be wrong on that. Their other authors told the publishers that if they did not pull that book, they were never going to give them another book to publish.
Right.
Now, these are academic publishers. Their lifeblood is academics having their books published by them. They couldn't afford to take a stance over Velikovsky.
Right.
So they discontinued his book.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was the best thing possible for him because he went round, I think it was the Souvenir Press or someone, and got them to do it, and it was a bestseller. But it shows you that book burning is not something that only happened hundreds of years ago.
Right.
You step out of line too far, and there are people that will, you know, make sure that book goes, and it still happens now.
Mm-hmm. So the Holy Kingdom put forward the argument that King Arthur was a 6th century king who resided in Glamorgan, and there was also another previous King Arthur a few hundred years earlier who fought against the Romans. And it's an evidence-based book. You're looking at ancient stones and various manuscripts which put forward this argument. Now, I'm just, for those who don't have any knowledge of history, Adrian, because your more recent book goes through other eras, the medieval eras and more up to date from the Arthurian line.
I followed it right up to the present in that book, the dynasty.
Yes. So just can we have a little timeline and just a summary of when did the Romans first come to Britain?
Right.
And how long did their empire last? And can we say when Anglo-Saxons came and Normans came? Just give us a rough overview.
Right, I'll give you an overview. The first time the Romans came here was Julius Caesar. He came to Kent in 55 BC. And basically he was kicked out twice. He doesn't admit that in his book, De Bello Gallico. He says he had tribute and slaves. And he makes a case that he did all right. But the reality is that the Romans didn't come back for 80 years.
Right.
Then in 43 AD, the Emperor Claudius, who wanted to prove himself, made a second invasion, and this time they were successful. They conquered very quickly the southeast of England, and then they had more trouble as they went into Wales. So that was in 43 AD. And then in 410, the Romans withdrew from Britain. That's the normal date that's given. There was trouble at home. You know, Rome was under attack from Visigoths and Huns and people like this. So they pulled their armies back. So, you know, you Brits, you're going to have to look after yourselves from now on. And of course the Brits, they didn't know about the military thing. Their young men had all been taken away by the Romans in their army, you know. So it's just the old men and boys left behind.
Right.
So
they were here for about 400 years in force.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So then the Romans left, and then initially there was a guy called Vortigern. I'm not going to go into this in detail. There was a guy called Vortigern, and he invited the Anglo-Saxons to come and defend Britain from pirates and invaders, particularly the Picts from Scotland, but also from other tribes trying to invade. And this was actually quite a common thing in the Roman Empire, that they employed what were called federati, or federates, who would work with them, be paid by them as mercenaries, basically, to do, you know, the fighting for them. So that's how the Anglo-Saxons arrived in. They first came in 448 BC, AD. There's a famous guy, Hengist and Horsa, and I've done a lot of research on them. So that's your Anglo-Saxons. That's how that began. And then you end up with your Anglo-Saxons rebellion against the Britons fighting back. King Arthur comes around about in the 6th century, and there's some argument about exactly his dates. Maybe 5th century for Arthur I, as they call him. We believe that there were two Arthurs and their careers got mixed up. Arthur I perhaps was an earlier warrior in the southwest of England. Arthur II is this Welsh guy that we're interested in, and he's the one connected with Camelot and the Holy Grail and all of that, the legend. And he's sort of mid-6th century.
Right.
So then you have the Normans who come around 1066.
Yeah.
So
it's a very famous date, obviously.
Yeah.
So this is when the Norman conquest.
Yeah.
So they took over large parts of England, but
Normans conquered. Well, they were lucky. England was the best organised state in Europe at the time. You know, it was a very wealthy state. It had a king. It had a working bureaucracy. So, and they had a sort of pretty centralised church. So all they had to do was defeat the king, arrow through the eye, Harold, you remember?
Yeah.
And take over.
Let me just interrupt you there, Adrian. But to the west, in Wales, there was still a dynasty of another kingdom.
Different story.
Another kingdom, if you like, that was not being controlled by the Saxons or
wasn't being it was a number of kingdoms and warring little
between
factions,
themselves. Yeah.
So it wasn't a centralised state that they could just walk in, take out one man and take over.
Right.
It was a much more piecemeal, difficult.
Right.
So, and plus it's mountainous, you know, whereas England, certainly the south of England, was relatively easy.
Right. But at some point the Normans did eventually take over Cardiff.
Eventually, 1092 roughly.
1092, so that's a few years after the 1066 date.
Yeah.
But they didn't get the whole of Wales, did they?
No.
So can you...
Yeah. Well, even in Glamorgan, which is it's the Vale of Glamorgan that they seized, and a guy called Sir Robert Fitzhammond, who was the Earl of Gloucester, originally came as an ally to the King of Glamorgan, who was fighting another battle with another king in the southwest of Wales, in Dyfed. And once they won that battle and the Normans pretended to step down and go home, they just put their ships over the horizon, waited till the Welsh had stood down, because they only had a peasant army, you know, they're not permanent soldiers. They came back, seized the castle, captured King Iestyn ap Gurgen, Cardiff Castle, the other castles of the Vale, and divided the spoils up among themselves. But there were other parts, particularly up in the valleys, that were not taken, that were still Welsh. And it took a long time before they were able to get hold of those bits and pieces.
Now, the dynasties that were there before the Normans came, they're going back maybe 1,500 years?
Yeah, something like that.
To Brutus?
Their claim is that they're descended from Brutus.
Right.
And that's another whole story that I could talk to you for hours about this, but the ancient British histories, when you actually read our history, not what archaeologists dig up and decide must be the history, but the actual written history that people believed.
Right, now, we had to take a short break there because Adrian suffered a nosebleed, which I think is rather ironic with the title of his book, The Blood of Avalon.
The Blood of Adrian.
Yeah, The Blood of Adrian. But he's okay.
Yeah, I've had to change my shirt.
Okay, let's continue with Arthur then. So Arthur, is disputed by some people as coming from South Wales, 6th century king, and there were numerous dynasties in Wales, Adrian. There's a bit more infighting, and just give us a picture of the difference between, say, Wales and what was happening in England.
Okay, well, England had been a unified kingdom really since about the time of King Athelstan, that we're talking about back in the 9th century. And prior to him, I think it was his grandfather, was a famous king called Alfred, who defeated the Vikings. And had he not done that, we'd all be speaking Swedish now, or Danish. But he defeated the Vikings and saved Wessex, the southwest corner of England, and gradually increased his kingdom to include Mercia, which is the Midlands, particularly the West Midlands, and Kent and London.
And he was big on Christianity.
Very big on Christianity. He himself learnt Latin and wrote prayers and translated stuff, and very big on education.
So I've heard people say it's the birth of the English nation.
Absolutely.
Right.
So Alfred the Great, I mean, when he was around, initially he had problems. You know, the Danes invaded from the north, defeated the Northumbrian king and then the East Anglian king, and they had a trick where they'd open the guy's chest up and take his heart out. You know,
Really?
They call that a blood angel,
Right.
Blood eagle.
Right.
And that was, you know, they were going to do that to Alfred as well. But he although he lost the first battle at Chippenham, he retreated into the Fenlands near Glastonbury, on an island called Athelney, which means the island of the prince. And afterwards he gathered his men together on the borderland of Dorset and Somerset and Wiltshire and Hampshire, around that area, just north of Shaftesbury. And they fought a big battle against the Danes near Westbury, where the White Horse is now, and defeated them. So I believe a lot of the so-called Glastonbury legends about King Arthur is really a memory of King Alfred, who did very similar things and was actually associated with that area.
Mm-hmm.
And it was his grandson, I think he was a grandson, Edgar, founded Glastonbury Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that this was the real Glastonbury, Avalon, Avalac of in Welsh literature is farcical. It wasn't.
Yeah.
That was somewhere else entirely. But they wanted to bring the legend to England. Mm-hmm. And so that's why a guy called Dunstan, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury later on, he was the first abbot of Glastonbury. He was a close friend of Edgar. And when they did digs in Glastonbury during the First World War, they did a massive dig on the cathedral ruins. They could find nothing earlier there than a sort of chapel of rest for King Edgar from 940. So there was no kind of old wattle church. There was none of all this so-called stuff that connects it with Joseph Arimathea. There were no tombs there. If you went there now, had this been the original real Glastonbury, you'd expect to find inscribed stones, written either in Latin or in the old British tongue. There's none of that there. Go to Wales and you find loads of that kind of stuff.
So Glastonbury, for some reason, became attached to Arthur, or the Arthurian myth.
Yes.
And but you just think that, well,
That happened slightly later.
You think there was some propaganda involved with certain monks,
yes,
to create that. Just to explain that.
Well, there was a serious fire at Glastonbury Abbey. I think it's around about 1100. My dates might be out on that, but anyway, it's the time of Edward I. You've heard of Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, and so on. He was also the Hammer of the Welsh, and he seized on the monks had a big fire, and then they claimed to have dug around and they found the bones of this tall man and a lead slab saying, "This is King Arthur, the once and future king." And so he decided, that's a great idea, and had a big shrine built for Arthur, and it put up near the high altar in what was now Glastonbury Abbey. So pilgrims would flock there, to see the shrine of Arthur. Mm-hmm. Brought a lot of wealth to the abbey, which grew and grew and grew.
Right.
So that's where that comes from, and it was really a political propaganda, because within Welsh legend, there's this prophecy that Arthur will come again, right? The once and future king.
Right.
So people expecting that he's not dead, he's going to come back.
Right.
Well, Edward could say, look, he's not coming anywhere. These bones are in there.
Right.
Get him out of there,
Right.
He's dead.
just staying in the era of Arthur for the moment then.
Yes.
Your previous book, The Holy Kingdom, went into that with a great deal of detail, but you think there's some adjustments that you would make to that now?
Yes, there are. Without going into details, within the hypothesis of Wilson and Blackett, Arthur the First figure, they believe was a 6th century ancestor of Arthur II, and that he lived at the time just after the Romans.
4th century ancestor, is it?
He's a 5th century ancestor.
Oh, right, okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
I thought you said 6th.
Yeah. The second one is,
Right.
but this one is 6th generations earlier.
Right.
And they believe that his centre of his kingdom, I have to get this right, was in the West Midlands, a place called Atherstone.
Mm-hmm.
So they believe that that's where Glastonbury was, and that's all connected with that Arthur I. I now tend to the other idea, which is that Arthur I was indeed, like many of the histories say, descended from the kings of Brittany, and there was that connection there with Constantine, his brother, and Uther Pendragon. So I go along with that more traditional, you could say, view, and that he came from there and he fought his battles, and partly in the southwest, but more up in Scotland, I think, on the edge there. So that's where we differ slightly, but on Arthur II, I'm right with them.
Right.
That he was a Welsh guy from Glamorgan, and his tomb is here in Glamorgan.
Right. You mentioned earlier the Romans coming to Britain.
Yes.
So around that time, this is when Christianity reaches Britain.
Yes.
And you've found new evidence
Yes.
with regards to that in your book, The Blood of Avalon.
I have indeed. I mean, this was astounding. The story goes that after the Romans invaded Britain, they had a quite easy time getting the southeast, but ran into more trouble as they went west and north, partly because it's more mountainous, partly because the tribes there were, more militaristic and fought back harder. And there was a guy called Caractacus, it was called Caradoc in Welsh. The Romans called him Caractacus. And he fought a long campaign for 9 years against the Romans, a sort of guerrilla campaign, from 43 AD. So that takes us up to 52 AD?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And eventually he was betrayed, and the Romans captured him and his whole family, and they took them back to Rome. And you'd expect that to be curtains. It normally was. If they capture someone like that, they parade them through the street and then they strangle them and throw the body in the Tiber. I mean, that was the Roman way. But Caradoc, I suppose he must have spoken either Latin or Greek, but he made an impassioned speech in the Senate. Claudius was there with his wife, and the Senate gathered round. And he said to Claudius, look, I'm a king of kings, I've got many people, under me. And you expected me to just surrender, just like that. And he said, yeah, you won, but, you can kill me, and it will soon be forgotten. But you have mercy, and pardon me, and it'll be remembered forever. And Claudius kind of liked, I'm not inventing this, you can read this in the works of the Roman historian Tacitus. He actually records the whole speech. And Claudius quite liked that. He obviously quite liked Caradoc.
Right.
And so he did pardon him. He made the proviso he had to stay in Rome, and he was never to bear arms against Rome again. Right. So they settled in a place called Esquiline Hill in Rome. And very interestingly, his whole family were there, and one of his daughters married a Roman senator called Rufus Pudens, who had been stationed in Britain. So there's a kind of karmic love match or something happening there. He became a Christian, right? And their house later became the Church of St. Pudentiana, which is on the Esquiline Hill. And that is actually the original Cathedral of Rome. And a cathedral means that's where the bishop has his seat.
Mm-hmm.
This little church, you can go there, and this is the original Cathedral of Rome. Later it was transferred to the big Basilica of St. John's Lateran, but they took the altar, which was a wooden altar, from the Church of St. Prudenziana to St. John's Lateran. And tradition has it that Prudence, what was her name? Claudia, his wife Claudia, they had a son called Timothy and another son called Linus.
Mm-hmm.
You can read names, Rufus and Claudia, Prudence and Claudia and Timothy in St. Paul's letters. He says, "Send my regards,
right.
to Claudia," and this kind of thing.
Right.
He stayed with them when he was in Rome,
Right.
And when the early Christian martyrs were being killed in time of Nero, Saint Prudenziana, who was a daughter of Claudia, and her sister Praxedes buried the bodies. Right? They went out, gathered the bodies, and buried them. Now, where did they bury them? Interestingly, there was another church there called St. Praxedes, or Praxide in Italian. If you ever go to Rome, you must go there because it has these wonderful frescoes on the wall. Mm-hmm. They're like sort of Byzantine mosaics. And go in there, and underneath there are catacombs.
Right.
And there was a notice there. I went in there with an Italian friend. He'd never been there before. He didn't know anything about this place. And he was amazed. There was a whole thing in Italian all about it. And it said that there were 13 popes buried there, and I think 3,000 Christian martyrs in these vaults underneath the church. And nobody knows about this place.
Right.
But what was telling, they had just around from the main door, the entranceway, there's a little area, not a chapel, it was more like a little museum. And there were scraps and pieces of what have obviously been an earlier building, or maybe more than one. And among these scraps, stuck on the wall, for you to see, were green man masks.
Right.
Now, the green man is nothing to do with Rome, right?
Oh,
this goes back to the early Celtic,
right.
Pre-Christian religion of Britain,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the other Druidic areas of Gaul and Belgium. You won't find all that in southern Europe. So who the hell was doing green man masks? It can only be Caractacus and his family before they became Christian.
Right, I see.
So that to me was proof positive that there was truth in this story. All
right. And with regards Jesus himself, there are writers who will say that he was a fictional character.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, I'm quite certain he was a real person.
Right.
I'm a Christian. And people say, well, the Gospels are written sort of 80 years after his death. But St. Paul's epistles weren't. And the other epistles, they were written not long after he died. So they are very early texts that tell us that, a lot about this new religion that was growing.
And it was being spread by Joseph of Arimathea, you think? Can you tell us about him? Because you believe he did come to Britain.
Yeah.
But you're far more sceptical over some people say that Jesus came to Britain.
I've not seen any evidence for that, and I'm someone that likes evidence.
But you do think there's evidence of Joseph of Arimathea in Britain?
Well, it's certainly in our histories.
Right. So do you want to?
Yes, I will.
So this is a relative of Jesus, then?
Yes. The tradition is that he was Jesus' uncle. Mm-hmm. Either his uncle or his great uncle. There's a little bit of unclarity there. He was either Mary's brother or he was her uncle. Mm-hmm. And he's the rich man who supposedly provided the room for the Last Supper. And after the crucifixion, he's the man who had the job of taking the body down from the cross. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, the sort of Jewish high-ups, the council. Because he was in that position, he could ask for the body You know, normally they're not going to do that, but he was able to ask for the body. And supposedly he's the one that pulled the nails out and got the body down and then had it put in his own tomb. You read all about that in the Bible.
Right.
Well, the legend goes that he later came to Britain with his own disciples, that he was a secret disciple of Jesus. As we know the 12 apostles by name, you know, but this guy's a very senior member of the Jewish hierarchy. He can't be seen openly to be following this other guy.
And he's known as Saint Illyd.
In Welsh,
In Welsh.
The Welsh tradition is that after Caractacus went to Rome, his whole family, his father was a guy called Bran, which means crow in Welsh. Bran the Blessed. And Caractacus had children, and among these children was a woman called Urgine, or which we would pronounce Eugenie. It's the same name as Igerna in the Arthurian legends. It's a name that was obviously popular. Urgine. And Saint Urgine came back with Joseph of Arimathea, and according to the Welsh traditions, he lived at a place called Clan Illyd, where there's a big round earthwork. Have you ever been there?
Is this is that the
giant
modern
circle? Yeah.
Is that the modern place name, Clan Illyd?
Clan Illyd, yeah. There's a church there, and there's an earthwork which is a big round, like Avebury, a big round circle.
Right.
It's got trees growing in it.
I don't think I've been there.
Oh, well, you must go there.
I've been to St Illtyd's church, which is much
that's
later.
Different. That's
right,
different. Yeah. And see, the idea is that the British, the Druidic people, their tradition was that if you were going to have a sacred event, you were going to do anything that was religious, you had to do it during daylight hours in the open, so the sun can see what you're doing. The sun's the eye of God, and it's watching what you do. So I could talk for hours about that. But anyway, this earth circle is obviously where he did his first sermons,
right,
to convert the British.
And
can I just finish
Yeah,
this?
sure.
And St. Urgine supposedly founded the first college, Christian college, which was at Clan Illtyd, where Clan Illtyd's church is, Llanwit Major. That is the site of the first college. They call it the Cor Urgine, which means the choir of Urgine. And there were little monk cells around it. And that's where they would study.
Right. This is at Llanwit Major?
Llanwit Major, yeah.
Right. So you would say that's one of the first places that was preaching Christianity in Britain?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Can I just add another little rider to that? I mentioned King Edgar and how he was found in Glastonbury. He came with a raiding party and deliberately sacked Llanwit Major and stole a bell from there.
Right.
And the legend goes he took it away, and the horses were really upset by what he was doing, and he was having terrible dreams, so he ended up returning it. Famous story about the bell.
Right.
Something you could look into.
Yes. All right. Well, if we just consider again the area where Wilson and Blackett did their excavation for the stone and the silver cross. I've covered that on the programme before, which are the relics of the legendary King Arthur. Yeah. And you believe that that's all good evidence and it's true. Now, that particular area and west of that area, am I right in thinking that in your new book you're saying that the Normans, that was an area that they didn't get full control over?
Yeah, right,
when they had the Norman conquest, that this was part of Wales which remained for some reason outside of the control.
Yes.
So just tell us about that. So so we've got Wales being taken over by the Normans. We've got this special place which you've termed as Avalon. Yeah. And do you think this is the real Glastonbury as well? Yes. Is in there? So just give us some of that.
Just give you the outline of that. Well, the Normans came in 1092. Right, and they seized the Vale of Glamorgan. This is Coisy Castle, and it has a very important part to play in the history that we're discussing about the blood of Avalon. The story goes that when the Normans invaded the Vale of Glamorgan, around about 1092, they seized the castles of Glamorgan and the manor houses, but not this one. And Sir Robert Fitzhamon, the Earl of Gloucester, divided up the spoils among his trusted knights, called the 12 Knights of Despoilation. But he left out one knight. He'd had an argument with him, a guy called Sir Payne de Turberville. And the story goes that he told Sir Payne, "You go and find your own," that he wasn't going to give him anything. So Sir Payne came with a little retinue of knights and laid siege to Coity. Now, it wouldn't have been this castle here that we see now. This is a later building, Norman and after. But there would have been something here. And the guy who owned it and owned the lordship that went with it was called Morgan, and he was a descendant of the kings of Glamorgan, grandson or great-grandson of Iestyn ap Gurgen, the last of the kings. And Morgan came out with his sword in one hand and his daughter in the other, and he said, "Let's not have blood spilt this day. Either you fight me man to man for my castle, or you marry my daughter." And Sir Payne wasn't stupid. He married the daughter, and by that way he got this lordship, got himself some land through marriage, not conquest. And he didn't owe it to his overlord, Sir Robert Fitzhamon. And he married the daughter, and then in the Turberville lineage there were twice more that they married into the royal line of Glamorgan. So they were in the lineage, as it were, through marriage. And this place here remained free from taxes. He didn't have to pay taxes to his overlord or the King of England or anyone else. They remained free. And this place remained free of taxes and a special place right up until 1405. So there's another side to this story as well, which hasn't really been understood properly, I think. Because Sir Payne de Turberville, he was a Breton. And there's another famous Breton in the Arthurian legends who's Lancelot du Lac. And Lancelot comes to the Grail Castle and he's served up food by the owners of the castle and asked a question, "Who does the Grail serve?" And he doesn't know the answer and he disappears. It's all part of the story. But he sleeps with the daughter of the castle's owner, the Grail Guardian's daughter, Elaine, who disguises herself to look like Guinevere. And afterwards Lancelot is disgusted with himself. "Oh, what have I done? What have I done? You know, I love Guinevere." But Elaine becomes pregnant and she gives birth to the perfect knight, Galahad, who later on becomes the new Grail Guardian, and he's the perfect knight. And this, I believe, is the real Grail Castle, and the story they're talking about is a veiled reference to the lineage of the Turbervilles, who became the lords of Coity through marriage, and their line that descends from them. They are the true Grail Guardians, and goes up right up to the present.
Right.
So the lordship of Coity, which included that little chapel on the hill in its property, and I think it also included Clan Illid. I'm not sure, just near Clan Illid, 3 miles from there, is Trevran, which means the farmstead or manor of Bran. So Bran the Blessed would be living there. St. Illid, who's his kind of confessor, his mentor, is living just nearby.
Right.
So, and then you've got this church of Arthur on the hill. Well, the name of that church on the hill, and this is something I also researched, it's called Clan Beda Funid in Welsh. My accent is probably really appalling, but that's kind of what it's called, which means the Church of Peter on the Hill, on the mountain, right? Beda, spelt with a B, because it's got clan in front of it. But that's kind of like Welsh, they're always changing the first letter of things when they join words together. It would be Peder if it was just on its own, Peter. But Beda is also an alternative spelling to that. It could be Bedwyr, B-E-W-R, which is the Welsh for Bedivere. So Sir Bedivere in in our romances, who's Arthur's closest knight, the one who buries him,
Right.
yeah, would be Sir Peter. So St. Peter on the hill, he's burying Arthur on there. He builds himself a little hermitage. Now, when they did the dig there, one of the things they found was a round hermitage building dating from that era.
Mm-hmm.
And right in the middle of that, they found this votive cross, Pro Anima Artorius, written on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be where Beda lived.
Yeah.
So Bedivere. And when you read the Grail legends, yeah, and the Mort d'Arthur in particular, you'll find a chapter in there where it talks about Sir Bedivere, how remorseful he was about the death of Arthur, and he gave up his being a knight and became a hermit, and he lived there by Arthur's grave, yeah, for the rest of his days, you know.
Right. So this is fitting in with the traditional mythical King Arthur.
Absolutely.
In Wales, but not in
Glastonbury.
Right.
So that's, you know, so when you go to Coity, yeah, Coity Castle, I believe that is what in legend is called the Grail Castle, because just flowing from there is a little stream. It's called the Nant Bryn Glas. Yeah.
Mm.
Bryn Glas means green or bluey-green hill, right?
Right.
Now, hill, when you put that into English, can be ton.
Right.
So Glas ton.
Okay.
Yeah? So it's the Bryn Glas ton. When a river flows into another river in Welsh, they call the confluence Aber. Aber, and it's always named after the smaller tributary that's coming in. So it'd be the Aber Bryn Glas. Yeah. Aberglaston.
Right.
Right.
So the name of Glastonbury's coming out there.
Yeah. And the church that's nearest to there, just a mile or two up the road from there, is called Coy Church. And that's the old church before they built the church at Coity.
Right.
It's the original church is there. And there's old stones and things there. And another name for that church is Clan Grallow. And if you read up in established history, they say, well, there was a St. Crallo, and they make up a whole legend about it, St. Crallo. But you won't find him in any genealogies.
Right. So
it's the Church of the Grail.
Right.
Behind me here is Coy Church, which is the original church of the Lordship of Coity. Later on, they built the Church of St. Mary's, which you can see right next to the castle. But this is the original church, and it's pre-Norman. Foundations, anyway. Goes back, we don't know how far back, but it has another name besides Coy Church, which is Clan Grallow in Welsh, and we're told that that means the Church of Saint Crallo. Now, I don't believe this. There's nowhere mentioned Saint Crallo in the genealogies of the saints, and each church has its own saint, and the genealogies are all very clear as to who's who and who's related to whom. There's no Saint Crallo. It's an invention, and the mythology about him is very contrived. I believe that Saint Crallo, or Clan Grallow, means Church of the Grail, pure and simple. This area here is the real Avalon, the real Avalac, and this is where the Grail was kept, in this area. And this is the church. So it makes sense to me, and it fits together with the history. Well, this stream might not look very much, but it's actually very important. It's called in Welsh the Nant Bryn Glas. And Nant means a stream or brook. And Bryn Glas, it gets that name from, there's a grassy or green hill over there. And that's quite a common name in Welsh for grassy hills, Bryn Glas. Bryn means hill, Glas means green or bluey. Now, you've probably heard the name Glastonbury described as another name for the Avalon, and it supposedly is in Somerset. But the other name for Glastonbury is Aberglaston. Now, Aber in Welsh means a confluence of two rivers, or an estuary where it comes into the sea. And here we have the Nant Bryn Glas flowing down, and it joins with the Iweni River just a little further along, which that joining point would be called Aberbringlas. Now, Bryn means hill, and so does Ton in Glaston. So Aberglaston means the same as Aberbringlas. So this is the real Glastonbury, is in this area.
I'll just get a shot of the Iweni River, so it just disappears through these little tunnels here.
Yeah.
And if I come up, so that's flowing into the Iweni River. Now, the fact that this area has remained outside the jurisdiction, let's say, of the Normans, is that just, and also contains these Arthurian relics?
Yes.
Is that just a coincidence, or was that done deliberately to protect those relics then? Or?
Well, I think it's both. The whole thing with Sir Payne de Turberville, he kind of went native, you could say. He was actually a Breton rather than a Norman. So the Breton language is very similar to Welsh, so he could have talked to the Welsh. He married a Welsh woman. And two others of his descendants, the Turbervilles, married Welsh princesses. Yeah, so they became Welsh, and because they were outside of Norman jurisdiction, they didn't have to pay taxes. But because of their Norman ancestry, the Normans weren't going to destroy them. Yeah, so it actually remained outside of the control of the crown. Initially, the robber barons and like Sir Robert Fitzhammond and the Clares and people like that were outside of the jurisdiction of the King of England because Wales wasn't England. But once, of course, the invasion of Wales had fully taken place, things were kind of brought under the English crown. But this place didn't become subject to the crown until 1405. And that was because it was sieged by Owain Glyndwr, the Welsh patriot, who burnt down all the other castles in Wales, but not that one.
So you think Owain Glyndwr may have known there was something important about
he knew
that?
he knew there was something important.
Right.
And his siege was raised by Prince Harry, later Henry V, who came with an army and saved Coity. And because of that, they then had to start paying taxes.
All right, and well, let's just consider the Holy Grail then, Adrian.
Yeah.
Because obviously there are lots of books about the Holy Grail and what it is or isn't.
Yeah.
So you think this castle has a connection to the Holy Grail?
It has a connection to the whole Grail legend, yeah.
Holy Grail legend. So what is the Holy Grail, in your opinion?
That's a whole other story.
But it's linked to this castle in some way.
Very much.
A bloodline.
Yes. There is a bloodline of Grail keepers, right? This is what you read in the texts. And they were obviously doing something similar to the Mass, the Mass, holding the chalice up, this is my blood and all that.
Right.
But what they obviously had in their possession was, I think, the original punch bowl, if you like, of Joseph of Arimathea. Because when in Roman times, they used to mix the wine with water. Right? They'd have a big bowl called a crater. Right? They'd pour the wine in and water in, and then they'd drink out of that. And description in the Last Supper. Now, Joseph of Arimathea was a wealthy man. Very likely he had a crater made of silver. Yeah, he would have had a crater. And if he's leaving Jerusalem and taking the rest of his family with him, and they're coming to Britain, he's not going to leave that behind.
Right.
So this idea about collecting the blood of Christ in the crater is all to do with understanding the mysticism behind very early Christianity.
Right.
And I could give you whole lectures on that, but we're going beyond the subject there. But basically the whole thing about the Holy Grail is not the Grail itself, it's the Holy Ghost that comes down and feeds everyone with the food that most delights them.
Right.
And it happens on Whit Sunday, if you remember, in the Arthurian legend, which is the Feast of the Holy Ghost. So this is what that's all about. It's the inner mystery of Christianity, and the presence of the love energy that comes in with it.
Let me just throw you an off-field question. bringing Christianity didn't prevent any more killing than went before it, did it? Really? It didn't stop people cutting people's heads off,
well, it hasn't
what have you.
stopped people. I mean, it's
now when
it's
the
opened
country
a
was
path.
right, but when there was paganism or the Druid religion, would there not have been a lot more peace in the country
They did
then?
blood sacrifice.
Yeah, but that was in a controlled way for.
Well, we don't know, do we?
Yeah. Do you know? Because I did an interview recently with a chap who's following this ideology coming out of Russia based on Vedic traditions, where everyone has a plot of land and they live in peace and harmony.
Very nice too.
Which was kind of replaced by Christianity.
Right.
This is why I'm just throwing that question in.
Yeah.
That it.
Well,
in your book there is surprisingly a lot of people getting their heads chopped off.
Well, there are. I mean,
Well, maybe not surprisingly.
there are
but that's-
bad guys.
Yeah.
There are bad guys around. But the real message of Christianity, if you read the story of Jesus, he's not cutting anyone's head off.
No.
In fact, he's putting the ear back on the servant of the high priest, isn't he?
That's true. That's true.
Precisely.
So you think Joseph of Arimathea was living in Glamorgan, or Coity, and also maybe Cardiff or was it South Wales?
Primarily, I mean, he maybe travelled around to other places too.
Right.
But, I mean, he was an old man at the time. But the original Christianity as it was developed, you had Jesus with his 12 disciples, right? Then he sends them off. And they have to duplicate what he had done. So each one of them would have had disciples. Right? So you have St. Thomas, who supposedly went east. You had St. Philip, who went to France. Other ones went to other places.
Right.
And Joseph of Arimathea supposedly was sent by Philip to Britain and brought with him 12 disciples.
Right.
So what he would have been doing is establishing a church. Now, a church, the word church, comes from the Greek word kirkos, or Latin circus. It should be pronounced churchus,
Right.
church, and it means a circle. So it's not a building, right? It's an organisation of a circle where you have the teacher in the middle and the disciples round the edge.
Right.
Yeah?
I see.
Like Jesus was with his.
Right.
So they're duplicating that. And the idea carried on in Wales right up into Arthurian times and beyond, that you had a saintly man who's kind of the wise one, and he takes on disciples as his circle. And he founds a church, like St. Illtyd you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there were other famous ones, who St. Samson. And
Right. So he's alleged to be Arthur's cousin. Is that right?
Yes.
So his church was not far from Lambeth Major, which I've been to.
Yeah.
So we were talking about Wilson and Blackett.
Yeah.
And so they are putting forward this King Arthur in South Wales
Yes.
theory or
Yeah.
actual evidence.
Yeah.
So why do you think then? Why is that so dangerous?
Well, I mean, it's dangerous on many different levels. First of all, you have to understand that the Welsh call them classe churches, right, which were schools. So basically their idea of religion wasn't that you had a big hierarchy with a pope on top and bishops and what have you. It was you had a holy man who was teaching the people to become spiritual and to develop. Well, that's a bit like you've got your own little burger stand, right? You're doing nice business in Coity or wherever, and then suddenly McDonald's moves in and opens a branch, closes you down, opens a branch. This is what the Normans did.
Right.
They closed down all these classe churches, gave them to the big orders, the Benedictines and the rest of them, and they then set up abbeys and priories and what have you, which are tied into the hierarchy to teach standard level what's being dictated down from above.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a completely different kind of version of Christianity.
Right.
Now, I think that resurrecting this Arthurian connection with that church on the hill is uncomfortable for those who don't want that to be known about. And among those people, we could include the church hierarchy. And who's at the top of the church hierarchy? The Church of England.
Right, the Queen, yeah.
Queen.
Yeah, right. So this was the churches in Coity then remained separate, remained like, not like the McDonald's, the small burger places. They're still practicing Christianity
ones of them
in a different way.
Yeah.
Not centrally controlled.
It wasn't totally free in Coity, because remember the Normans were around and they're building new churches and so on. But something remained there. And there was, I think, an undercurrent that was connecting back to all this. And the whole Arthurian thing is very worrying to the Norman establishment. They have to try to control it,
right?
Because it's tied in with patriotism and the risk of rebellion.
Right. At some point, though, Coity was taken over by the Normans. Is that right?
Well, it was sort of at the time of Payne de Turberville, but what happened was he became Welshified, right, and his family. But then they died out in their name, and it went over briefly to a family called Berkerolles, Sir Lawrence Berkerolles, who was the son of a couple of one of the last princesses or ladies of the Turberville dynasty. But then he was murdered by his wife, and there was a big upset and trial, and she was buried at the crossroads outside St. Athens, and her ghost is still said to haunt the place. And then there was debate about whether it should then go to his relatives who were nothing to do with the Turberville line, or it should revert back upstream, if you like, and go to another line of the Turbervilles and then down from there. And that's what happened. It went to the family called Gamage. And the Gamages ruled it for a couple of 100 years, a bit longer, till the last one. Eventually they died out in the male line. There was one a lady called Barbara Gamage, who was the heiress that was left. And in 1584, so we're in the time of Queen Elizabeth I now, she married a young man called Robert Sidney. And he was the younger brother of Sir Philip Sidney, who was very famous as the poet. He was the great chivalric knight.
Right.
And Robert married this lady, Barbara, without the Queen's permission. The Queen had other ideas for who she should marry. So he was in bad light with her, and it caused problems later. But anyway, she married him. His brother died 2 years later. And so he then became the eldest son of the Sidneys. And in due course, under James I, he inherited the titles of his uncle, the Earl of Leicester. Remember, the Earl of Leicester, the Queen Elizabeth's favourite, Robert Dudley. So he was a nephew of Robert Dudley, and he inherited his titles, Earl of Leicester, Viscount de Lisle. And they are very important in sort of later, that sort of Jacobean period, and have a connection to what's called the Rosicrucian movement.
Right.
And I've researched that in some detail. It involves James I's daughter and Frederick V of the Palatine in Germany. They ruled a little state called the Palatinate, had its capital at Heidelberg. And they were championing the idea of science, of new ideas, finding new knowledge, and really, really upset the Catholic Church. And especially when he was elected, or he became king of Bohemia, and he could have been, there was a risk that he was going to be elected as the next emperor. So they came down really hard on him and drove him out of Bohemia, Prague first, and then they destroyed Heidelberg and started the 30 Years' War, which was a terrible catastrophe for Europe. But that was all sort of, wasn't meant to happen. But the Rosicrucian movement later developed into what we would call the science movement, particularly something called the Invisible College in Britain, which I think we might be talking about in another time.
So is any of this covered in your other book, London and New Jerusalem?
It is.
So can you give us a brief summary of that book, Adrian? What does it explore?
That explores principally the way that London was rebuilt after the Great Fire of 1666, to be a new Jerusalem in preparation for the return of the Messiah.
Right.
Because there was a belief, still is in some quarters, that the British are descended from the lost tribes of Israel,
Yeah.
so that Britain is the new Israel. You've got to remember that at that time, 1666, there was no state of Israel in Palestine. The Jews were dispersed. That was just part of the Ottoman Empire. So they had this idea that the tribes had regathered in Britain, and were forming this new Jerusalem in London. Right.
So what is Rosicrucianism then?
What is Rosicrucianism? Well, at its essence, it's a belief in the need to get more knowledge.
Right.
And to do it through scientific inquiry.
Right.
Not to just accept what's been passed down from Aristotle.
Right.
And really...
Or the Bible.
Anywhere.
Right.
But the Rosicrucians were very much Bible readers as well. They had a belief that there were two books of the Word of God. One was the Bible, and the other was the Book of Nature, and you needed to read both. So someone like Sir Isaac Newton was a Bible expert, scholar, studied that far more than he did science, but he also studied nature to work out, the various laws and so on. This is really the basis of our modern civilization.
Yeah. And that came from mainland Europe, though?
Well, it was brought to mainland Europe from Britain.
Oh, right, I see.
Initially.
Right.
And I believe there is a connection there going back to Coity and that marriage between Robert Sidney and Barbara Gamage, but that's a whole other subject. I have covered it somewhat in that book.
Right. Right. And you talk about the War of the Roses as well a lot.
Yes.
And how the Welsh were supporting one or other side of that.
Yeah. You need to understand what that's all about, which is about bloodlines.
Right.
You've got to remember that roses, you graft them one onto another. You take a rootstock and then you graft your tea rose, whatever, onto that rootstock. The rootstock would represent one kind of rose. And in fact, generally speaking, we're talking about the Brutus line, right, which is the white rose of York. And then the grafting on can be the red rose of Lancaster, which is bringing in the bloodline of the Norman kings or the English, really. But the Rosicrucians are looking at a third rose, which is the golden rose, the rose of Sharon, which is really the Christ line, the line of the Holy Family. And that's the Grail dynasty and how that weaves in. So when they're fighting the Wars of the Roses, they go into in Shakespeare, you've read this, I'm sure, they go into the garden of the temple and they cut roses and say, I'm for so-and-so, I put the white rose on. And the other one says, oh, I'm for Lancaster, I put the red rose on. Very likely it was the same bush that had some white roses and some red roses on. It's really symbolising the bloodlines.
Right, I see.
And you can go into that, and it's a deep study, believe me, but that's what it's all about.
You just mentioned Shakespeare there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a book, Sweet Swan of Avon, where he claims that the real author of Shakespeare's plays was a woman called...
Mary Sidney.
Mary Sidney. So, do you go along with that? So Shakespeare didn't write any of his plays?
Duchess of Pembroke.
Yeah.
Well, she was the sister of Sir Robert Sidney and Sir Philip Sidney. She's the one who published Sir Philip Sidney's poems, made him famous. She was probably the most educated woman of her day, with the possible exception of Elizabeth I herself, but even there, there's, who can say. She knew all about court etiquette. She spoke Italian, she spoke French.
So do you think that these Shakespeare plays then, they're like the modern day equivalent of the BBC?
Yeah, well, Shakespeare worked for her.
Yeah.
And her husband. I mean, they were his patrons.
Do you think that the stories and narratives are manipulating the population as to believe in this or that, or?
Yeah, she was basically forming this new society and instructing them in their history, but in part, but also these great legends and tales. But I don't believe, I mean, I'm sorry, you know, I used to think, well, why didn't Shakespeare write Shakespeare? You know, come on, don't be so elitist.
Yeah.
But when you go into it in depth, you realise that a lad who'd grown up in, you know, Stratford-on-Avon, just about got a grammar school education, but he's, you know, he doesn't know about a lot of other stuff.
Right.
Is he really going to be know all about, you know, pentameter verse, and is he really going to know all the details of court life in Italy and how things are done?
Right. So at the very least, you would say he was helped.
Very least, he was helped.
Right.
I don't say that she wrote everything, but I do think she was in charge of it all. And because she was a woman, she couldn't publish it under her own name.
All right, that wasn't allowed, was it?
No, it was published after she died. The first folio edition was published by her sons, you know, in a memoriam to her. And the whole thing about Shakespeare, was he gay, you know, because of one of the sonnets, Sweet Swan of Avon, he's talking about his love and for this man.
Yeah, right.
Well, if it's a woman that's writing it, it's rather different, isn't it?
Right, I see, yeah. Yes.
And the Avon actually flowed through her land, not Stratford-on-Avon, but the Hampshire, Wiltshire Avon flowed through her land. So, and there is actually a picture of her with a big bodice thing with swans on it.
So the Sidney family then, this was very
Critical
friendly with the
family.
royals.
Very close.
And very influential, you think?
Yeah, Henry Sidney, the father of Sir Robert and Sir Philip and so on, he was the playmate of Henry VIII.
Oh, okay.
You know?
So do you think with this Rosicrucian movement then, were they wanting to give knowledge to the masses? Was that the idea? Or were they wanting to keep it elitist so that only certain people have the knowledge? Or?
I don't think they were trying to do that. I think they were trying to raise the level of education. But in those days, that probably did only mean a small segment of society, because the masses basically couldn't read and write, you know.
Yeah.
But they could go to plays. So you could educate them through the theatre. They didn't have television, obviously, but theatre is very popular.
Right.
So it is one way that you can educate the masses, yeah.
Right. All right. So, is it Coity or Avalon? Are they both the same thing?
Not exactly. The name Avalon, and if you read William of Malmesbury, he goes on about Aval and meaning apple and on meaning island of apples. But it's got nothing to do with that. Yeah, it actually comes from the name of a guy called Avalac,
right,
who was either the son or the grandson of a couple who in the Welsh genealogies are called Anna and Belly. Right. Now Anna, if you read the Welsh in the Harleian 3859, which is in the British Library, it will tell you that she was a cousin of the Virgin Mary. Now how can that be? How can she be a cousin of the Virgin Mary? Very simple. If Joseph Arimathea is her brother or her uncle, then descendants of them are going to be family members. So easy for her to be a cousin of the Virgin Mary. This guy Belly, in the Welsh triads, tells us that there was a prince called Belly who came from the London area. He was the brother of Guiderius, who was killed by the Romans in battle in 43 AD. And he left that area with a retinue of men, and they went and joined Caradog in South Wales to carry on the fight against the Romans. So these, and they're praised in the triads because they didn't ask for any pay.
Right.
Right? These guys who gave their lives and time but didn't want to be paid, you know.
Right.
So he married Anna, and this is the origins of this Grail dynasty.
Right. So why is it being kept secret?
Well,
or why is it not being
basically
promoted?
The Norman dynasty has no validity. if you actually look into the subject in depth, right, William the Conqueror had no bloodline to either the English or the Welsh throne.
Right.
His claim was that he'd been promised that he could become king.
Right.
And he'd been promised by Edward the Confessor. And you've got to ask yourself, well, what was Edward confessing? Yeah, Saint Edward the Confessor. What was he confessing? Well, it wasn't his sins. To confess something, means to state openly and to make a legal contract. Yeah. So his confession was that William should be his successor. That's why they have all coronations in front of Edward's tomb.
Yeah.
Because he's bearing witness. These are the guys that I've put on the throne.
So the current lot now that are the monarchs now, they're descended from William the Conqueror.
Yeah.
Right.
There have been other marriages since then.
Yes, there's other, but you would say that they had no right in the first place.
They had no right at that time other than conquest.
And that's why King Arthur dynasty would be...
Is a threat.
Is a threat. Right. Are there other dynasties that would be a threat as well, or is that the main... Is it
well,
mainly
the Scottish dynasty.
Right.
At that time, I have to get this right, I think she was a great niece of Edward the Confessor, descended from a king called Edmund Ironside, I think that was his name, who was a half-brother of Edward the Confessor. And she fled to Scotland, Margaret, and married the King of Scotland, and took with her a very precious relic of the Holy Cross. And that's why the palace in Scotland is called Holy Rood Palace.
Right.
It's a fragment of the Holy Rood.
Right.
And this, I think, might be another link with Rosicrucianism.
Right.
Because the rose could be seen as being symbolic of the Tudor dynasty.
Right.
Yeah, the Tudor rose. And the cross of the Scottish dynasty.
Yeah.
So that when you had the marriage between one of the daughters of Henry VII with the King of Scotland, it brought the two together, and James I was descended from that. So there is another secret there, which I haven't explored in that book, but it is another link in that.
Yeah, it's my knowledge of history could be written on a postage stamp, Adrian, and but let's just come back to this idea that that certain things in history are a threat to the current lot.
Yes.
Right. That means that they must have some great minds looking into all of these. For example, did they know a lot of what's in this book before you researched it yourself and etc.? They must have some very well-informed people on history.
They maybe know things that I don't know.
Right.
And I should think I would be surprised if they don't. But one thing I do know is that Princess Diana is of the Arthur line. She's descended from the Sidneys.
Yeah, I was going to.
Do you want to do that?
Talk about that? Yeah. Because obviously, I'm not. I don't support the monarchy. I'm not. I don't believe in the monarchy.
No, fair enough.
And you've linked the Arthurian line to Prince William, right?
Yeah.
So were you doing them a favour, Adrian, or it's because could you not do that with millions of people?
Well, not millions of people are going to be King of England, are they?
No, but it's to me it's just a coincidence.
Well,
the fact that Lady Diana, you think you
I
can
don't think I know. I can prove it.
Yeah, you can trace that she's got some of that bloodline in her.
She's descended from the Courtly dynasty, but then it's mixed in with all of other
But so's
blood.
half of Wales, surely.
But the whole thing about the rose or the rose lineage is that you're hoping that you're going to get another bloom. Right now, not every you might be going to get some horrible sport that's no good at all. Right. But every now and then you get the odd bloom. It's like in a family, you know. Most of the children might be one lot. They're not very clever, not very bright, not very pretty. Then you get one that, that's a throwback to great aunt so-and-so.
Right.
Yeah. So the whole thing about the Grail dynasty is that they're descended from Joseph of Arimathea, and B, he's descended from King David.
Mhm.
And the idea is that hopefully you're going to get a Messiah coming, the seed
yeah.
blossoms again, like with Jesus.
If you believe in all that nonsense.
Well, if you believe in that nonsense. But the whole thing in the Bible is that Jesus is descended from David.
Mhm.
So he's going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the one that's going to lead us out of trouble.
And it goes ultimately back to Abraham, or then Noah, isn't it? And
Yeah, well, you can go back as far as you want, but David's the big one where royalty is concerned.
right.
And I just find it interesting. I'm actually very disappointed with William. He seems a rather boring character from what I can tell. But maybe Harry.
Well, are you
More
convinced
promising.
Harry Hewitt.
Harry Hewitt, yeah.
What do you think of that theory, that Harry is not Charles's?
Well, you put the photographs together.
Yeah.
You make your own mind up. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a geneticist, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because he's got the Diana lineage, but he hasn't got the other one, has he?
Yeah, and you nicely, you're very diplomatic, let's say, when you talk about the Diana, well, I call it an assassination, but when you talk about the death of Diana,
well, it's interesting.
You leave it open.
Well, I'm not convinced that she was the one they were after. I think that, when they're doing a card trick or, some magic, you try to distract the audience to look at the wrong thing. So all this focus on Diana, well, why did they kill her? Blah, blah, blah. I think it was Dodi they were after. If you think about this guy Dodi, right? A, he's the son of Muhammad al-Fayyad. And say what you like about Muhammad al-Fayyad, he's come from nowhere. He's I don't want to say too much, but let's say he's a suspect character, right? And he certainly doesn't like the royal family. Dodi, we all know, was a playboy, right? And he was planning to marry, so it would seem, Diana. And I don't know if you saw Muhammad al-Fayyad's shrine in Harrods, where they had the two glasses and the ring, her lipstick on the glass, all that. Forget that. What were they up to? And who might have wanted Dodi out of the way?
Right, yeah. So you think it might have been an assassination, but of Dodi rather than Diana?
That's my suspicion.
Okay. In an interview that I put out a few weeks ago, I was talking to a guy, and he said that that you have to fish through the Bible in order to find nuggets of truth or things that you want to identify with, but you can't say that it's all true, right? Because there's been so many different versions, etc. But this philosophy of being threatened by this line, or this Messiah is going to come back, as you just described, to me is fanciful thinking. It's not based on science or reality. Is it not a bit sick and perverted, the way that people look at these ancient books like the Bible or any religious book and change their behaviour based on things of the past, things that, okay, people, they did base their lives on it in the past, but we don't now. We are more enlightened. We have got access to more knowledge and information.
How esoteric do you want me to get?
Do you think there are people powerful people who are still influenced by all of this ancient knowledge and ideas in the Bible?
Let's take the gloves off, right? Let's get down to brass tacks.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You've done a lot of research in your time into what we could call the nature of evil. Evil people doing terrible things.
Yeah.
Maddie McCann.
Yeah.
For a start. Now, you've got to think, what is a human being? Right? Now, if you're a materialist, you say, well, we're just animals. When you die, and that's it. Just like a dead pig. It's no different. But if you're a religious person, then you say, well, we're actually spirits living in flesh, having experiences. And we go through life after life, through reincarnation. Right? But the purpose, and if you read, I've studied Hermetica in detail, I've studied Egyptian religion in detail. And the idea of the concept that is taught there is that souls originally were with God.
Mhm.
Right? God is pure love.
Mhm.
But some of them rebelled. They wanted to do their own thing. They wanted to be creators in their own right.
Mhm.
So they distanced themselves from God, yeah,
Mhm.
and rebelled.
Mhm.
And for that, they were cast down, the fall of the angels.
Mm.
But a way was created for them to get back, and that way was through incarnation on earth, so that they would go through experiences and they would learn that they must learn to love.
Mhm.
And they must learn that actually we don't want to be going that way, we want to be going that way, back home. This is what all spiritual teachers teach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there are also discarnate entities who've not incarnated, who don't want that to happen,
Right,
and who are deliberately corrupting the human race all the time.
right.
And they can take over certain people and get them to do terrible things.
Yeah,
And so someone like Adolf Hitler, for instance,
Yeah.
the classic,
yeah,
he was not just a monster, he was a possessed monster.
yeah. I've very rarely used the word evil in my presentations. I do think that you can take any person and look at their behaviour, and often you can find a reason why they're behaving in certain modus operandi, why that person let's say seems evil or has done this. Might be something in their childhood, might be something that they've experienced. I think that I don't like to I'm not making excuses for people,
No,
but
okay.
I think that you can look at any person and normally find a plausible motive why they're acting in that way.
Yeah. You can act in that way, but the spiritual view, right,
Mhm.
is that what you do unto others will be done unto you, which is, we normally call that the law of karma.
Mhm.
And so you're going through these lives, one after another, and what you want to be doing is to be paying off your debt, your karma,
Mhm.
so you can get back up the ladder, as it were.
Mhm.
But you've got someone else pulling you down the other way,
Mhm.
trying to make it worse for you. So you kill someone, you're going to get killed unless you can find a way of repentance
Mhm.
to get over that without that happening.
Mhm.
So evil tends to perpetuate itself. That's how we see things like ISIS happening in Syria, the terrible things being done there.
Mhm.
But there's even more to it than that. But this isn't the time really to go into that. But
Mhm.
so the idea
mean,
of Jesus.
I think
Of
let's
teaching.
just say first, Adrian. I think when you make any claim of someone being evil, I think you really have to have a look at all of the evidence to see if the evil's not coming from somewhere else and manipulating that person, or mind control. There's all different ways why someone might have ended in. The evil is sometimes hidden.
Well, I think people are taken over by it, and they can certainly buy into a group energy.
Mhm.
And do terrible things they wouldn't do or wouldn't have done had they not become part of a cult, say, or a political movement that has that as its agenda.
So do you believe, because I don't think the Bible specifies reincarnation, although I believe it used to.
It used to, yeah.
Right. So you would prefer the earlier version?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that got squeezed out.
Right, yeah.
That the early Christians understood about reincarnation.
Right.
That's why Jesus says that John the Baptist was Elijah.
Uh-huh.
He's the later reincarnation of Elijah.
And is this reinforced by your research into Egyptology then? Some of
Yes.
this? Right, yeah, which we'll talk about in another discussion.
Yeah.
Right. So how confident are you that we reincarnate and get a new? Do we get a new body immediately, or do we hang around for a while? Or
I can't tell you how long it takes, but I can tell you I remember some of my lives.
Really? Right. So you're convinced that?
I'm convinced that I've lived before.
Right. All right.
And I've met plenty of people who are also convinced that they've lived before.
Right. Do you think it could ever be proved?
I think when you die, you remember it. But the reason you don't remember it is because
When you die, you remember what?
what you've done before and your previous lives and what you've done this one and how you got on. You know, there's a whole judgment thing goes on. But the reason you don't remember it is because you have to be given a chance in this life to learn the lessons that this one's about.
Right.
If you were thinking all the time, well, I used to be King so-and-so, or, you know, or alternatively, well, I was the guy who swept the street, you know, why am I now a prince, you know? Your soul wants to have certain lessons, and it's put you into a situation where you're going to have those lessons. And at different times in your life, you're actually going to meet specific people who are going to help you on that path or hinder you. And it all is down to you then, how you exercise your free will, because you have a relative free will here. That's the other important thing about the earth and having a body, that it gives you energy from your food instead of having to be connected to the energy coming down from higher up.
Which we will talk about in another
Which is all
interview.
to do with the game with the Holy Grail, but this is a whole other story.
Sorry?
This is all connected with the Holy Grail.
Right.
The Holy Grail is the idea of re-establishing the connection with God's love.
Right, well, just ask me then. You're saying then that you need certain people of certain genetic lines in order to do that. Is that?
I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm saying that,
is that not
there's a hope
right?
that someone's going to pop up that's going to be the special one. Yeah.
You don't. See, I find that hard to
well, it
agree
doesn't
with.
matter anyway, because I mean the reality is that it might be someone else entirely who is of that line, but he was just the guy that was sweeping the street. Yeah, Jesus the carpenter's son. You know, he wasn't living in a palace, but he evidently had the lineage. So
do you think then that people in positions of power believe that the lineage to these characters in the Bible is really, really important? Or do you think they're just using the Bible or using that?
Depends who they are.
Right.
There are some who are adepts. There are some who are black magicians.
Right.
And the black magicians want to manipulate situations so that they don't have to face up to what they've done. And they feed off other people. But that's a whole other subject, you know. That's what the whole thing about vampires and so on is all about.
Yeah, I can identify with that. Some people seem to.
Some people are, you know, they have either themselves or something else that's living in them. If you read the New Testament, Jesus is always casting out evil spirits. You know, that's not me inventing this; it's all in there. You might say, "Well, that's bloody nonsense." Yeah, he didn't know enough about psychology. You might say that, but it's a different perspective, and it's, I think, that we are being misled when we dismiss all that, because there's nothing the devil likes more than for us to think he's a joke. Yeah.
All right. On that note, thank you, Adrian, and we'll.
You decide what you're going to put in of all that.
All right.
Possibly going a bit off track, but
yeah. Yeah. I'm
ready for a beer.